I'm going to share my screen. And
thank you very much.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, yes. Wonderful. Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. So it's great to be with you. Given limited time, I'm just going to jump in. My name is Anthony Leiserowitz. I direct the Yale program on climate change communication. And we study how people are responding to climate change around the world. What do they understand and misunderstand about the causes, consequences, and solutions? How do they perceive the risks? What kinds of policies do they support or oppose? And what kinds of behaviors are they engaged in around climate change and climate change solutions? And then as scientists, our ultimate question is answering why. What are the underlying psychological, cultural, and political reasons why some people get very engaged with the issue of climate change, others are apathetic, and some are downright dismissive and hostile, or at least they are in my country and just a couple others around the world. So today I'm going to address three big questions. First, what is the role of the public in climate action? Second, what is the role of communication in driving climate action? And third, how are publics around the world thinking and feeling about climate change, including in Brazil? So let's start with the first question. What is the role of the public in climate action? Well, this question is much, much bigger than public opinion, which many people think of as just a measure of public support for government policies. And that's, of course, important, but that's not all that I'm talking about. This question is really about the climate-related decisions and behaviors of nearly 8 billion people worldwide. So here you've all probably seen charts like this. This is where we are right now in the world. We're at a critical juncture in our pathways of, do we end up going to, if we have no climate policy, which is very unlikely at this point, but we would end up from anywhere from 4 to 4.8 degrees centigrade by the end of this century. Under current policies that are currently underway, we're going to get to 2.7 to 3.1 degrees C. Here's where pledges and targets that have come out of Paris and Glasgow would take us. But of course, there's a big gap between pledges and actual implementation. So we have a lot of work to do. And then here's where we actually need to get to is 2 degrees, and even better to hold to just 1.5 degrees warming, which everyone has agreed is the safe zone, the safety zone of this issue. But the key point I want to make about all of this is that the single biggest source of scientific uncertainty about these scenarios, which one of these pathways we end up walking down, is human behavior. As one recent paper on climate scenarios begins, the future climate depends on future human behavior. So as an American, I'm going to quote one of our most famous presidents, Abraham Lincoln, who said, "Public sentiment is everything. With public sentiment, nothing can fail. Without it, nothing can succeed." So what does that mean in the context of climate change? How does public sentiment or public perceptions, decisions, and behavior affect climate change? Well, here you're looking at the role that all the different sources of climate change pollution, carbon pollution around the world, and how each of these major sectors is going to be involved in addressing and reducing carbon pollution. It's the electricity sector, it's food and agriculture, it's industry, transport, buildings, of course, land use change, and then even human health and education will play a critical role. And pretty much everything we do as human beings affects the global climate. Although critically, and this is really important to underscore, there are enormous differences in the carbon footprints and vulnerabilities of different people within and across nations, which raise critical questions of equity, fairness, and justice. But at the global scale, humanity needs to make a rapid transition from a 19th century energy system, in which we're still digging stuff out of the ground, like coal, oil, and gas, and setting it on fire to power our societies, to a 21st century energy system where we harness the energy flowing around us at all times, from the sun, from the wind, from the tides, and from the heat beneath our feet. So first, how do we use, waste, or conserve energy at home and on the road, especially those of us in the developed world? Just consider the transportation choices billions of people make every day using motorcycles, cars, trucks, trains, buses, ships, airplanes. All of these transportation choices and systems are still predominantly driven by the burning of fossil fuels. Yet in the next decade, hundreds of millions of consumers worldwide will need to choose to replace their petrol-burning automobiles with electric vehicles, or choose lifestyles that don't require an automobile at all. Will people choose and use more climate-friendly transportation? Second is consumer behavior, because everything we buy, from products like computers and cell phones, furniture, clothing, and toothpaste, to services like health, banking, and insurance, are produced by value chains still reliant on fossil fuels. Will billions of consumers choose to buy the products and services that are better for the climate? What kinds of homes and buildings will we choose to buy, retrofit, and live in? Single-family homes, apartments, skyscrapers? How will they be designed? Will we choose to live in urban, suburban, or rural locations? All of these decisions will have enormous consequences for the climate. What kinds of food will we grow and eat? Food and agriculture are major sources of carbon pollution. For example, will we continue to eat more beef, the production of which currently generates substantial carbon pollution, or instead choose more plant-rich diets? Our collective food choices and behaviors already have enormous consequences for the climate, as well as for our own health, our landscapes, and other species. How will we power our lives? For example, the world basically needs to electrify everything. Our vehicles and our buildings, including the ways we heat and cool our homes, cook our food, wash our clothes, and heat water, just to name a few daily activities. This will require critical but infrequent decisions like replacing, say, a gas-fired furnace with a heat pump, to everyday decisions we make in the kitchen. How can we empower consumers to make these more sustainable choices? Third is our social behavior, which includes communication. Do we talk about climate change with our friends and our family members? Do we hear about it in the media and from our leaders? Talk is not a substitute for action, but it is a critical and necessary condition for action. If we don't talk about climate change, then for most people, the issue is out of sight and out of mind, and certainly doesn't seem like an important issue, let alone an urgent one. This also includes the role of our deepest cultural values and worldviews, which I'm very gratified that our earlier speakers have all mentioned. But this issue raises the most fundamental questions about who we are as human beings. What are our proper relations to one another? What are our proper relations to the more than human world of which we're part? What are our relations for those who believe to the divine? Okay. All of this issue raises some of the deepest and most profound questions in humanity. And then fourth, but not least, is our political behavior. Will the public support or oppose government policies to address climate change? Will they support a higher price on carbon or not? What policies are politically feasible? And let's not forget voting behavior. Will citizens prefer candidates that are climate champions and vote out of office those that are blocking progress? Public participation in community planning and decision-making will be critical at every level of society. What kinds of communities do we want to live in the future? How can we participate in the design and implementation of these plans? And increasingly important, how can we protect ourselves from ever more severe climate impacts? And then most importantly, from my perspective, is advocacy behavior. Will we not just support climate action, but demand it from our leaders? That's everything from signing petitions to donating money to groups working on climate change, to volunteering with advocacy organizations, to putting direct pressure on our government officials and company leaders to change the system, and for those willing to put their bodies on the line to engage in nonviolent civil disobedience. All of these human decisions, all of these choices, all of these behaviors will collectively determine the fate of the planet. That's why we care what the public thinks, what the public feels, and what the public does about climate change. Public sentiment shapes the social, cultural, and political climate of climate change, enabling or constraining climate action. My second big question then is, what is the role of communication in climate action? How do we inform, persuade, and enlist public sentiment. So communication, along with the opposable thumb, is one of the key capabilities of the human species. Communication has enabled humanity to build an incredibly sophisticated and powerful civilization that is now literally reshaping the planet. Communication is how we share ideas, emotions, stories, experiences, science, and culture. From one person to another, from one person to millions of people, and from millions of people to one person. From the first engraved clay tablets thousands of years ago, to Gutenberg's printing press, to TikTok, we now have the ability to communicate at enormous speed and scale. And today, communication is central to solving the climate crisis. We only know about climate change because of the communications by scientists from thousands of scientists around the world who've been conducting climate research for more than 150 years. The other nearly 8 billion of us only know about climate change because those scientific findings, those insights, have been communicated to the rest of us. We're now at the dawn of a new age, not just in communication, but in the science of communication research, which can now be conducted at a global scale. So now let's turn to that last third big question. How are publics around the world thinking and feeling about climate change? So we recently conducted a survey in over 110 countries and territories worldwide in partnership with Data for Good at Meta, conducted on the Facebook platform. While not a strictly representative survey, it is representative of the views of the 3.5 billion people worldwide who use Facebook, which in many countries like the United States and Brazil provides a good estimate of national public opinion, while in less developed countries, it tends to represent the views of the online population, which tends to be better educated and with higher incomes. But overall, this survey does provide us with a unique global data set of public climate change beliefs, risk perceptions, policy support, and behavior. We'll be releasing these results in much more detail next week, but I'm going to take this moment to share just a few key findings with you today. So to begin, one of the most important things that we've learned from this, as well as other work that we've done over the years, is that there's a large difference between the developed world and the developing world in terms of even basic awareness about climate change. What you're looking here at this map shows that in the developed countries like the United States and Canada, Europe, Australia, Japan, et cetera, and including in Brazil, overwhelming majorities of the populations understand that climate, or at least know something about climate change. But in many countries in Africa and in Southeast Asia, you still have minorities, less than 50% of the country, who have ever heard of climate change before. In fact, we estimate that there's still over 1 billion people on the planet who've never heard of climate change before. So we still have a huge gap in terms of just even basic awareness. But let me quickly say that does not mean that these people who've never heard of climate change are unaware of changes in the climate. They are very, very, very aware of changes in their local climates. They know that temperatures are changing. They know that precipitation patterns are changing. They know that growing seasons are changing. Okay? And in fact, all we had to do after asking this question was provide a one-sentence description of what climate change is and how it affects weather patterns. And immediately we find that enormous majorities of the public everywhere in the world says, yes, climate change is happening. So it doesn't take a lot to communicate the fundamentals that this problem exists, but we do need to communicate it. And just to say that we still have a huge need to communicate even the fundamentals that climate change is happening. But another major pattern that we see is about how people perceive the risks. And what we see is that the inverse pattern now, that those people in more developed countries like my own, like the United States, like in Northern Europe, tend to see climate change as a distant problem, something that is far away in time, as in it won't be serious for a generation or more, or that it's about polar bears, or maybe developing countries, but on the other side of the planet, not my country, not my community, not my friends, not my family, and not me. And that's what you see here is that countries like the United States and Northern Europe tend to say, this is not going to harm me personally. By contrast, we see that people in the developing world overwhelmingly say, climate change is already affecting me. Now that I understand what it is, I can see that it is already having enormous consequences for me and my family. So it shows that we still have a different need in the rich countries to help them better understand the point that the last speaker was making, is that we are all at risk. This is not a problem far away in time and space. It's happening right here, right now, to all of us. And we're going to sink or swim together. Moreover, we find that even though many people think climate change is happening, they don't yet understand that it's human caused. In fact, it's entirely human caused. Of course, the climate has changed naturally over millions and billions of years, but this time it's different. It's the direct result of the burning of fossil fuels and land use change. And yet many people around the world do not yet understand that. They may accept that climate change is real, but they think it's just natural. It's just part of the natural cycle of the weather or climate systems, or some people will even attribute it to the divine or other superhuman forces. But we still have some fundamental work to do to help people understand that this is the direct cause of human activities, human choices, which means it's under our control. We can decide what the future of climate change is going to be. And unfortunately, that plays out into this critical finding, which is that many people around the world continue to support using more fossil fuels, especially in developing countries, because one, they don't understand that this is human caused. And secondly, because let's be clear, they still face fundamental challenges of energy security. We have plenty of energy in my country and in Europe and most other developed parts of the world, but in many other parts of the world, people are still desperate for a light bulb. And so it's very difficult to talk to people in, say, Africa or remote India and say, you're not allowed to develop your own energy infrastructure and to have what we have in the rich countries. So here you're seeing that many are just saying, we want more energy. But the good news is that huge majorities everywhere around the world want to make the transition to more renewable energy. So while many people don't yet understand that we need to get rid of our addiction to fossil fuels, we do have enormous global consensus that we need to be using more renewable energy in the future. And then one last point here that I think is crucial to what we're talking about today, and that is the way we talk about it, or really we don't talk about it. Very few people around the world say that they hear about climate change in the media at least monthly. And monthly is not often. Okay. In fact, even hearing about it once a week is not often. We hear about, other issues, COVID, economic issues, et cetera, every single day in the media, repeatedly in the media. But climate change, by contrast, is still a tiny, tiny proportion of overall global discourse about all the other issues that and things that we are concerned with as human beings. So it's not just the quality of our communication. We have a fundamental quantity problem. So we need to talk about this more. So to conclude, mitigating, preparing for, and adapting to climate change will require not just smart policy or economics or technological innovations, but different decisions and behaviors by 8 to 9 billion human beings. It is incumbent upon all of us to communicate with, engage, and empower our friends, our families, our fellow citizens, and especially our leaders to build public and political will for climate action. Thank you again for the invitation to join you today and for your own work to help communicate climate change.